Chapter 18. The Inner World. Is that the way out? Asked Glyssa. She pointed towards the approaching goblin army. No, said the stoic golem. Tell me about the hole later and get us out of here, screamed Glyssa. Bosch turned from the mother's womb cavern and ran down the hall. Soon the hammered walls gave way to natural metal formations. Tubes ran up the walls and along the ceiling. The hammered floor continued for a little while longer, but eventually gave way to a rusted iron tubing that seemed to run throughout the goblin complex. The corridor turned into a cave, and Glyssa could finally see the entrance ahead. Light from the red moon washed over the floor like blood. They emerged from the cave in the middle of a mountain range. Tubular metal formations spread out ahead of them in every direction. The mountains looked like a furnace. Iron tubes sprang up from the ground and intertwined with one another around the central core to form metal butts that dotted the landscape. Many of these tubular mountains were larger than Taj Nar. The ground was a twisted mass of iron tubes. A layer of rust coated everything, giving the mountains a dull red appearance. Glyssa glanced back at the entrance to see if they were being followed, but Bosch's long legs and tireless pace had left the goblin army well behind. The mountain behind them was enormous. It dwarfed the surrounding butters. They were about a quarter of the way up the side, and yet the top was obscured from view, fading into the sky and stars above. The entire mountain was made of the same tubular metal Glyssa had seen inside the caverns. In fact, all the formations around her looked like they were connected through an endless iron pipeline. What the flare formed all of this? She asked out loud. Memnock. Memnock made all of this? Asked Glyssa. The mountains? The furnace? The big flaring hole? He shaped the world to create homes for everyone. What is he? A god? A planeswalker? Asked Glyssa. I cannot remember. Well, don't hurt yourself. Glyssa slapped him on the shoulder. It will come back. Give it time. For now, tell me about that big hole. The mother's womb? I ascended a hole similar to the womb, said Bosch. I recall the inner world that Slowbat described. I remember emerging from such a hole and seeing the stars and moon above. Wait a minute, you said a hole similar to that one. Are there others? Yes, I believe so. How many? 3, perhaps 4, said Bosch. Do you remember anything else? Asked Glyssa. No. Bosch ran on in silence. Glyssa turned around and watched the red moon disappear behind the mountain. She examined herself in the dim light of the blue moon, the one that goblins called the Eye of Doom. The wound over her ribs had closed, but her feet had swollen in the hours since the battle on the furnace floor. She summoned mana from the distant tangle and let it pulse into her palms. She rubbed her feet lightly with the energy. It soaked into her blistering flesh and soothed the pain. She would need new boots, but her feet would heal. She had been lucky. Glyssa glanced up at the Eye of Doom again. They must head towards the eye next, which always seemed to hover at the horizon. Chump said the moons were heading for a convergence. Each moon, she knew, would rise over its own land. During her time with the Leonin, she had seen the yellow moon, what the Leonins called a sun, rise high above Taj Nar. The red moon, Slybad Sky Tyrant, was almost directly overhead when they emerged from the goblin's lair. She was sure the Eye of Doom shone most brightly over the Quicksilver Sea. That was where they would find the Vidalcan. That was where she would find her answers. Glyssa glanced about. The only light came from the distant blink-moth stars. While her eyes were poor and pitch dark, they worked well enough to see in dim twilight. She spotted a faintly illuminated rectangle outlined in tubular outcropping. There, she said, pointing to the disguised door. Bosch pressed on the tube next to the door to open it, and slipped inside. Gusser dropped off the golem's shoulders and led their way through the halls. She didn't know the layout of the lair, but she was sure she could find the inner wall that housed Slobad's secret scrying room. She watched for the duct covers. After twisting and turning through the lair, she found a long hallway that had a duct opening placed at regular intervals, each across from an intersecting corridor. This is the spot. I don't know how to get in there, though. I can get us through wall. I don't think Slobad would like that very much. We'll just wait for him. A portion of wall opened up behind them, and Slobad peeked out.
You're right, Elf. Secret room not very secret with hole in wall, huh?
Slobad! Shouted Glisser. She ran over and dropped to her knees to give the little goblin a hug. You made it out.
Of course.
He pushed the elf away and brushed himself off.
Slobad always survive. It's what he does best, huh? You okay?
I could use some new boots and a good night's sleep, replied Glisser. How are Dwoggett and the others?
Alive,
said Dwoggett, coming from behind Slobad.
Thanks to you, my girl.
Thanks, Slobad. He got me there. He put me back together just as he did Bosch. Slobad looked at Bosch.
I need to finish job. Do better work on Elf, huh?
The goblin led the golem and Glisser into the secret room and began to work on the golem's arm. Bosch held his limb in place while Slobad climbed onto the metal man's shoulders to work. Glisser sat across from them and pulled off the tattered remains of her boots. She set the boot sheath aside and laid out the scorched leather to see what she could salvage. Dwoggett took the leather from Glisser.
Let us help, he said. We repair before you leave.
Thank you, Dwoggett, she said. I'm going to need them. I have a long trip ahead of me.
Where will you go? What great mission take you and Slobad all across Mirrodin, huh?
Gusser almost laughed. I plan to go to the Quicksilver Sea, she said. I'm going to find the person responsible for the attack last night.
We thought it was goblin shamans, huh? Come to purify the Carcoat once and for all.
They probably helped, but those silver beasts belong to someone who's been trying to kill me. I've seen similar creatures before. While Slobad fixed Bosch's arm, Glisser told Dwoggett her tale. She explained how Slobad saved her from the leveler, and how they had found Bosch in the dross. She told him of the deaths of her family and friends.
Those deaths not etched in your metal, huh? They not your fault. Do not blame yourself for the corrosion of others.
Glisser nodded. We plan to cut away the corrosion so it can't taint our metal any longer. That's why we go to the Quicksilver Sea, to find the person responsible.
Slobad tell me your destiny has something to do with the great shaman Croc and the Mother Heart, said Dwoggett.
I don't know. It may be all connected somehow. My shaman, a troll priest named Champh, told me of a world within our world. He believed it was very important to my destiny. What can you tell me about the inner world that Croc found?
Croc keep journal during trip. Goblin shamans destroy, but not before I copy most, huh? We call it the Book of Croc. I'll let you read.
Thank you. Dwoggett took her boots over towards the cultists, who were resting on the other side of the chamber. Gusser turned to Slobad, whose hand had disappeared into the joint between Bosch's arm and his shoulder. Where can we take Dwoggett's people to where they can be safe? She asked.
We take to the leveler there as soon as Bosch fish, huh? Should be safe there again, huh?
You and Bosch take them there. I'm going to the Quicksilver Sea.
Leveler land not far. We all go. Slobad know the way. Bosch get us there fast, huh?
Dwoggett returned with a dark leather book. The cover was curved, leather wrapped around a piece of mountain iron. Inside, leather pages were bound together by straps laced through the iron half-tube. Gusser took the book, as she had seen the trolls handle religious objects during ceremonies. Touching it filled her with a sense of wonder and purpose she had never before experienced.
She bowed her head to Dwogget, then turned back to Slowbad. You two are staying. It's not safe. That's why we go, grunted Slowbad, pushing against some tool into Bosch's shoulder. Keep crazy elves safe.
You will require our assistance.
Bosch's commanding voice seemed almost comical as he sat holding his own arm in his lap, while Slowbad perched on his back, grunting and poking inside of the golem's shoulder. Glissa wanted to argue the point. She knew it would do no good. In the end, they were just as stubborn as she was. For now, she began to read the Book of Krark.
The Great Mother called to me again last night. She sent me a vision of her heart. I floated down through her womb into an inner world. Her heart hung low in the sky, glowing with the might of the four suns. I reached for it, but the heart was just out of my reach. It hung there, filling the inner world with power and light. It felt warm, as if I was standing before the furnace. I felt content, like I had found my true home.
Glissa looked up from the book to see an alien landscape. She stood on bare metal. The ground around her was featureless, flat, smooth, and grey as far as she could see. The Book of Krark had disappeared from her hands, but she remained in her own metal-clad body. Huge, plant-like formations of crystalline material dotted the metal plains around her. The crystalline towers reached hundreds of feet into the air towards a huge ball of energy that dominated the sky. They glittered and reflected the light of the heart in every direction, creating rainbows of colour that swept across the sky and collided with each other. Glissa knew this was a flare, though she had never recognized one when she was in it. How could this scene come from her life, or some racial memory? The elves had never been to the inner world, or was she reliving Krark's journey? Yet she was in her body, not some ancient elf or goblin body. The vision began to dissolve around her as she pondered the reality. No, 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 she cried. The sound echoed strangely across the plains. It bounced back and forth among the crystal towers, multiplying into hundreds of no's, winging their way across the inner world. The vision came back into focus as Glissa concentrated on the echoes. She walked among the crystal towers. They seemed to reach into the sky towards the central moon. Or was it a sun? High above her, Glissa could see white specks floating in the air. Blink moths? She couldn't be sure. They seemed to glow, but perhaps it was the light of the orb passing through them. The orb pulsed like a beating heart inside the breast of the world. Each pulse sent a different colour cascading around the orb. Blue, red, white, black, green. The specks began to swirl. The light pulses within the heart cycled faster, and the tiny motes swirled faster as well. The effect was dizzying. Glissa's knees buckled beneath her, and she fell to the ground. She stared up at the heart. The coloured lights sped across the heart so fast they became a blur. A cloud of white specks turned into a maelstrom, twisting around one another, around and around, like a tunnel to the heart. The heart turned bright blue for a moment at the other end of the storm, then burst in a shower of colour. A blue orb of energy hurtled down into the twisting tunnel like a bolt of lightning. A huge thunderclap shook the ground and tossed Glissa into the air. When she landed, the elf glanced up and screamed, just before a blue ball slammed into the surface of the inner world, and her. Glissa awoke with a start. The Book of Krark clattered to the floor. The room was dark around her. A single fire tube burned in the far wall above the cultists. They were asleep on the floor. Glissa picked up the book and set it on the table. She rose and walked around the room. Bosch sat in the corner, his red eyes glowing in the darkness. Glissa could see Slowbad curled up in the golem's legs. He was snoring again.
Are you all right?
Whispered Bosch. Yes, but why do they always have to end with my death?
I'm sorry.
It's not your fault. It's nothing. Just a bad dream.
You should sleep. I will guard until the sun set.
Glissa chuckled. You've been listening to Slowbad. The elves call them moons.
Why?
I don't know. They just feel like moons to us. They never rise above the tangle. They give us precious little light. The sun should burn bright above you and warm your face when you look at it.
You should sleep. We leave after the moon's set.
Glissa watched the cultist sleep. Her repaired boots stood on the floor near Dwogget. She picked them up and sat at the table again to put them on. Glissa glanced down at the Book of Croc again, then at the remaining cultists. There weren't that many of them left, but they still clung to their beliefs, even though that belief had nearly cost them all of their lives. These goblins gave up their former homes, their former lives, and risked everything, because they believed in something larger than themselves. Could she do no less? Something bad was happening to their world. Chump knew it, Ushanti dreamed it, Glissa had seen glimpses of it in her own flares. She was fighting for them all now, whether she wanted the mantle or not. She had become the champion for the goblins, as well as the trolls and elves, even, perhaps, for the Leonin, Nim, and everyone else on this world. There was an inner world. She knew that now. Somehow she also knew that she had to reach it to face her destiny. Bosch had been right. She needed Slowbad and the Golem in this battle. The stakes were too high. It wasn't just her against some killer. It was her battling for the future of their world. Bosch had some information locked in his head about the inner world, and Memnarch. She needed to make the right choices, to avoid Ushanti's vision. Slowbad knew how to survive. He had an instinct for living, an instinct she would need in the coming days. Bosch was right. She needed them. If not for her, then for the Croc cultists, for the Leonin, the elves, and the trolls. Glissa picked up the Book of Croc and carried it over towards the Bosch. She lay down and curled up beside the metal man, holding the book to her chest. Bosch patted her head with his newly replaced arm. She fell asleep with the golem's arm wrapped around her like a blanket. They left after the red moon set behind the mountains. The terrain flattened somewhat as they made their way towards the glimmer void. Rust-coloured outcroppings of metal still surrounded them, but the iron tubes no longer ran through the ground beneath their feet. Those had given way to flat metal slabs that seemed slammed together in a huge red tile mosaic, making the descent slow and torturous. As they skirted beneath the rusty butts, Glissa could see the rolling plains of the glimmer void glittering in the starlight of the distance. Bosch and Slowbad scouted ahead during the night, and returned just as Glissa saw the top edge of the yellow moon between two outcroppings. The goblin and his golem led Glissa and the cultists to an abandoned cave they had found. That night, Glissa read more of the Book of Croc. As a shaman who received visions from his deity, Croc set himself apart and made an enemy of the shaman elder, who seemed more concerned with his own power than imparting any sort of wisdom to the goblins. One passage stood out to her.
I have asked the shaman elder to let me into the mother's womb. I have told him of my visions and my desire to seek her heart. He cursed me for spreading lies about the mother, and promised to send me to the furnace if I spoke such heresy again. He cannot see the glory of the mother. I must make him see. I must see the heart. She calls to me.
The next night, Glissa came to the passage Slowbad had recited to her in the cult lair before the attack.
I stood in a sloping chamber with no roof, surrounded by ancient towers of coral. A giant sun hung above me, glowing like Sky Tyrant, and Bringer, and Ingle, and the Eye of Doom. I had found Mother's heart. The heart beat in the sky, giving life to the world. The stars danced around the heart, happy to live in her divine glow. A heat warmed my face and heart. It was home.
On the next page there was a sketch, showing the scene Croc had described. Glissa recognized it, both from Croc's descriptions and from her own flair 2 nights before. Look at this, Bosch. It's an image of the inner world. Dwugget must have copied it from the original journal. Do you see the specks rising up from those towers? Croc says it rained upwards towards the hearts from them. I saw these in a dream the other night. Are they blink moths? Chump told me that the rain comes from the blink moths, the stars we see above us. Bosch looked at the picture in the book. His eyes narrowed, and Glisser could tell he was trying to remember anything else about his life within the inner world. His eyes opened wide, as if he had had a disturbing vision.
Mycosynth? Those are mycosynth spores, not blink moths. The mycosynth crystals produce spores. Blink moths are eternal. Mycosynth arrived later.
What do you mean? Memnarch created the microsynth but not the blink moths? I thought you said he made everything.
Memnarch shaped the world to his desires. He did not create it. Blink moths predate even Memnarch. Mycosynth arrived later, like a plague. I believe I may have been created to battle the mycosynth infestation, but I lost the battle. That is all I remember. Everything else is blank, until you and Slobad found me in the Mephedros.
Gusser left Bosch alone with his patchwork memory, and returned to the book. They were less than a night's travel from the Leveler's Lair, and she was almost finished with the Book of Croc. It read like a flare. Croc had been drawn to the womb and heart, as if by destiny. He entered the massive hole and walked down its length into another world. A world inside the world, that curved up and away in all directions.
It's like being in a valley surrounded by hills that stretch up to the sky. In that sky, Mother's heart hangs like a single sun that never moves.
Chump was telling the truth. Croc had seen it. Bosch had lived in it, and Gusser had dreamed it. But what did it all mean? If there were huge holes leading to this inner world, why had no one ever seen them in the outer world? Why had no one but Croc ever descended? Bosch had said the microsynth was a plague, but if they were so pervasive, why had no one seen them? They were pieces of a puzzle, but Gusser had no idea how to put them together. Gusser pulled out the vial of serum. Were the answers in there? She thought about drinking the serum to gain knowledge of whatever ancient power had created the blink moths, but Chump had kept his secrets to protect the elves and the trolls from the serum. He died protecting his secrets, and her. She would only use the serum if she had no other options. They arrived at the Leveler's Lair way before the moons rose on the next morning. Gusser and Slobad went in to investigate, while Bosch remained to guard the cultists. Slobad lit his fire tube as they entered the dark chamber that had been his home. The place had been ransacked. The table, the chairs, and the workbench had all been destroyed. When Slobad checked the passage to the Leveler Lair, he found it blocked off. You were right. Whoever takes care of those monsters found your home. Aren't you worried they'll come back?
Only if some crazy elf destroys more levelers, huh? You not gonna do that, huh?
Said Slobad, smiling. I was thinking about it, said Gusser. She looked around. There's not much space here.
More chambers there than there, huh?
Pointing to the walls on either side of the small room. He pushed the remains of his workbench out the way and opened a panel, then moved across the room and opened a second panel.
They survived.
The other chambers were untouched, and Gusser crawled out to get the cultists. It's not much, but you'll be safe here, she said to Dwugget. The Shaman Elder will never be able to send anyone here. When this is over, maybe Slobad can clear up more chambers for you.
Thank you again. You've done so much for us. We'll follow Croc and Glisser now.
Well, I'm not sure I'm planning to follow Croc down that hole.
You will. All answers are within the Mother's heart.